Hi, I'm Paul Kyogan from GK Tuition, and in this video I want to talk to you about inferential statistics. Now the question I've chosen to go through here is 2018 Paper 2 Question 9 Part B. In this question we're dealing with a survey. The survey is carried out to investigate the popularity of a television show. We're told that the number of people surveyed is 1,560, and we're asked to calculate as a percentage the margin of error for this survey. Now you should remember that the formula for the margin of error is 1 over the square root of n. This allows us to calculate the margin of error for any survey, where n represents the size of your sample. So once you remember your formula for margin of error, this is a very basic question. All we need to do is sub in, instead of our n, we just sub in 1,560. So the margin of error for this sample is given as this. And we need to get this as a percentage to one decimal place. So if you plug that into your calculator, it works out as 0.0253. And obviously this is a decimal, it's not a percentage. So in order to convert a decimal to a percentage, we need to multiply by 100. When you multiply by 100, you're essentially just moving the decimal place 2 places. So that corresponds to 2.53%. But the question asked us to leave it to one decimal place, so I need to round down. My final answer is 2.5%. If you carry out a survey of 1,560 people, your margin of error is given as 2.5%. In B part 2 of this question, we're told that 546 of the people surveyed enjoyed the show. So the first thing you should do is get this as a proportion. 546 of the 1,560 people who are surveyed enjoyed the show. In other words, 0.35 or 35% of the people surveyed enjoyed the show. Now we're asked to come up with a confidence interval as a percentage. Come up with a confidence interval to determine the percentage of people who actually like the show. So let's work out the maths, and then when we've figured out the maths, let's think about what that means. The formula for working out a confidence interval is the result, or the proportion of people who enjoyed it plus the margin of error. That's the larger one. And the left-hand side should be the proportion of people who enjoyed it minus the margin of error. Now we've already calculated our margin of error and we've just calculated our proportion. So P in this case represents the proportion of people who enjoyed the show. And I can calculate this by getting the result of my sample. 35% of my sample enjoyed the show. But I've already realized that based on the number of people that I've surveyed, the result of my sample could be off by 0.025, or in other words by 2.5%. And then I do the same thing on the left hand side, except instead of a plus, I'm going to put in a minus. So in this case, all I need to do now is I need to add up my figures. That's a 5. If I add up my figures, I get 0.35 plus 0.025 gives me 0.375. On the lower end, I get 0.325. Okay? But the question obviously asked me to get this as a percentage. So to write it as a percentage, once again, I multiply by 100. That works out as 37.5%. And on the lower end, I get 32.5%. Now, so the maths there is actually relatively straightforward, but understanding the maths is a lot more complicated. Let's imagine that 1 million people have watched this show. If 1 million people have watched this show, I'm trying to determine what percentage of people actually enjoy it. But obviously it's impractical for me to survey 1 million people. So all I can do is take a small sample. For example, in this case, I took a sample of 1,560 people. And I figured out what percentage of those people enjoyed the show. And 35% of those people enjoyed the show. But that doesn't necessarily mean that 35% of the 1 million viewers enjoy the show. This sample might be skewed one way or another. These people might enjoy the show more than average, or they might enjoy the show less than average. So in order to accommodate for the fact that these people might be skewed, I need to add on the margin of error and subtract the margin of error. I figured out in the first part of the question, the margin of error is 2.5%. So I add on 2.5% and I subtract 2.5%, and I can conclude that if 35% of my sample enjoyed the show, I'm fairly certain that if I actually surveyed the 1 million people, the 1 million viewers, if I actually surveyed all of them, between 32.5 and 37.5% of those 1 million people would have enjoyed the show. And what I have in my box here is my confidence interval. Okay, for the final part of this question, we're told that an executive claimed that 40% of the viewers enjoy this show. Now, we're asked to conduct a hypothesis test based on B part 2, to state the null hypothesis, state the alternative hypothesis, and make a conclusion to investigate if the executive's claim is true. So, if the executive claims that 40% of the viewers enjoy the show, our null hypothesis, which is represented as HO, is that we agree with him. It's that 40% of the viewers enjoy the show. On the other hand, our alternative is the opposite of that. So our alternative hypothesis is that the percentage of viewers who enjoy the show is not 40%. Remember, in a hypothesis test, your two options are you either reject the null hypothesis or you fail to reject the null hypothesis. You cannot accept either one. I can either say that, okay, I can either reject this, say it's not true, or fail to reject it. So I'm not able to say it's untrue. In order to determine which one to take here, we have to look at our previous answer. In the confidence interval, we worked out that based on our results, between 32.5% and 37.5% of the viewers enjoy the show. So clearly, the executive's claim is exaggerated. Clearly, it's less than 40%. So in this case, that means I'm going to reject the null hypothesis. So I've written down my conclusion at the bottom here. I'm going to reject the null hypothesis because the 40% is not within my confidence interval. And when you reject your null hypothesis, you should reiterate what you mentioned for your alternative. Rejecting the null hypothesis is kind of the same as accepting this. You're not allowed to say that, but it's kind of the same as accepting the alternative. So because of that, I rewrote this as the percentage of viewers who enjoy the show is not 40%, and that's my conclusion. Now, I hope all of this made sense. If you're struggling with any of that, or you'd like me to explain it a little bit differently, just send me an email or let me know in class, and I'll try and clarify it for you.